Welcome, everyone. I'm Anya Samek. I'm an associate professor at the Rady School of Management at UCSD, and today I'm joined by Amanda Chuan. She's an assistant professor at Michigan State University.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
And today we're going to talk about Amanda's paper on the impact of diversity statements for students. So tell me more about what those diversity statements look like, why you decided it was important to study them, and how you're doing that.
Great. The diversity statements we are using, what we mean by diversity statements are the statements that institutions typically put forth. Here, what we're exploring is higher education, so universities, and the diversity statements that they put for their students, but this extends to organizations as well, where recently we saw this explosion in the use of diversity statements that proclaim a commitment to the diversity, equity, and inclusion of the constituents. So in our context, this would be college students. In terms of the motivation here, so this is joint with Andrew Johnson, who's a doctoral student at Michigan State University at the time, and he was interested in looking at racial gaps in how people respond. And we were trying to improve sense of belonging and seeing if diversity statements could do that, as we would expect the intention behind these diversity statements would be. Um, so that was the motivation. And I think this is an important topic to study no matter the political landscape, because proponents talk about the importance of making sure that we are dismantling invisible barriers that keep people from reaching the same goals as others. But opponents argue that diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in general have become very effort-based, right? So it's sometimes used as a branding strategy for organizations to look progressive. Universities might be using them to look like they care without actually putting their money where their mouth is and actually looking to the results. And often the metric of success here is what are the efforts? But effort is not enough. Intentions are not enough when it comes to actually helping people who've been historically marginalized. And so we think this is an empirical question. We think it merits an empirical answer. And so we ran an experiment to test what do diversity statements do for students? Does it improve sense of belonging, or might it have other impacts?
And so this is an interesting topic because pretty much everyone you talk to, policymakers or university administrators or even students might say, well, yeah, these diversity statements are great. Like it seems like a really good idea. And the aim is good, like the reason we're doing this is good, but then ultimately without testing it, we don't know the true implications of the diversity statements. And that's where experiments are really important, because if we can understand the impact of these rather than just rolling them out, we can kind of see what works, what doesn't work, who it works for.
Exactly. That's a great point. And that's exactly what we try to do is see, does this work? And if so, how might it work and who does it work for? And it's
And
interesting.
you work with your university at Michigan
Yeah.
State on this?
Yes, so this was in done in collaboration with Michigan State University. And what's interesting is that when you look to prior research on this, it's not clear what the answer is, because in psychology, there's been these what I call them sense of belonging experiments in the paper, where they show that these like short online interventions during the first semester of college increase grade progression, GPA, and career success up to 9 years after the intervention for minority students. And so if diversity statements you know, can co-opt these benefits by simply stating, hey, we care about equity, we think everybody belongs, then maybe there can be these large impacts on these large benefits. But on the other hand, within the lab, there's been more mixed evidence that reading these diversity statements may actually activate stereotype threat. And so the language of these diversity statements, which talk about diversity, right? They talk about differences among individuals, is very similar to those like typical Claude Steele type stereotype threat experiments, where just mentioning that there's a gender gap in math performance lead women to underperform on a math exam.
So stereotype threat is this idea that if I am reminded of my gender or of my race, and there's some kind of stereotype about my gender or race, that stereotype threat might cause me to behave as if I was part of that stereotype in a way.
Yeah, and so what's important about stereotype threat is it's about your beliefs about what others think of your social group, right? In a particular domain. And so it's domain specific. And so my biggest form of stereotype threat is driving because I'm an Asian female, and every time I get behind the wheel, I'm like, oh, okay, I need to be extra careful. So it's domain specific. Whereas like for math, for example, I might experience stereotype lift because the stereotype with Asian students is they're going to be good at math. So it's domain specific. And so we would expect if stereotype threat is operating for very specific predictions to be happening
So
with
I
certain
shouldn't
outcomes.
remind you you're Asian or female before you get in a car,
If
before I
you
let you
rem
drive me somewhere.
Right. So if I'm about to get in a car, do not remind me I'm Asian or female. But if I'm about to take a math test, remind me that I'm Asian. And
That's interesting.
yeah, and I guess if I'm going to go to college, maybe remind me that I'm female. Um,
So the alternative hypothesis here is
there
that
it's not.
the alternative,
So the alternative hypothesis, well, so the null hypothesis is that there's going to be no effect. And the alternative hypothesis here is that there's going to be something. But importantly, what we do is we need to specify the hypotheses separately for different subgroups because if stereotype that is operating, we would expect different effects based on, what social group you think others attribute you to, but also the specific domain that the stereotype threat is operating.
sure.
So
So it sounds like the designers of these policies, they just think, look, diversity statements are good. They don't think about stereotype threat. But if we bring in the possibility that stereotype threat might exist here, we might think that minority groups or people who normally already feel marginalized at college might have a negative impact from these diversity statements
exactly.
because of that theory from psychology of of the stereotype threat.
Exactly. So within the academic domain, Black and Hispanic students have reported an awareness that there's negative stereotypes associated with them. Asian students have reported an awareness of being associated as like nerdy or overachieving. Within the STEM domain, and it's specific to the STEM domain as opposed to college in general, women tend to experience stereotype threat is the empirical evidence, whereas men do not.
But
And so
this
those are
hasn't really been
separate things that need to
tested.
be. Hmm?
It hasn't been really tested with diversity statements so much.
No, no. So in the lab, there's been some evidence that stereotype that may have been activated by reading these diversity statements, but we don't know, does this negative affect die beyond when people leave, or does it persist when they wake up the next day, and does it change behavior? And so what we're able to do is we run the experiment, which I can talk about, and then we link it to a survey as well as administrative data from the university. And so we can see for the treatment group, around the very week of our intervention, we built an event study regarding their course selection. Do they choose courses differently around the very week of our intervention compared to the weeks before?
And
In
so
two
just I
different
want to
ways.
stop you and say, I think your field experiment's very cool. And the reason there isn't a lot of work outside of the lab is because this is really hard to do. So I'd love to hear now about
Yes.
exactly how you sent those emails and how you convinced the university this was a good idea, potentially as well.
Yeah, it was a lot of back and forth. I was like pretty sure it was never going to happen, but they did grant a random third of the entering freshman class of the university, so that's 3,800 students. They gave us the email addresses, and then we sent out the control email versus the treatment emails. So we're comparing two groups of people. They both got an email, and the email was, "Hey, it's 2 days before the first day of classes. We're providing an online session on academic success. Click here to register." And then if you receive the control email, that's pretty much all you see before. That's pretty much all you see. And then the treatment email would have, in addition to that information, a diversity statement right before the link to register for the academic online session. And so the reason we did this 2 days before the start of classes is because first, we think this is when students would especially care about information about how to excel in college. Second, this is when they're actively selecting their courses. And so, seeing this diversity statement may influence the courses that you then choose. And third, you're in this new community. You just stepped foot on campus. You're in this new community of 40,000 other students. You are trying to figure out your identity on your own, away from your parents, and you are forming beliefs regarding how others view you. And so, if you receive this email about social groups and the boundaries upon which these social groups, as the community defines it, are going to be, then you're going to be thinking about how do others, which categories do others lump me into? And so we think that could influence how you participate in class. Do you talk to your classmates? Do you form study groups, et cetera? And so then we measure a variety of different outcomes, but we think this, but we look at GPA because we think your GPA could be impacted by your performance or your course selection.
And so what do you find?
Okay, so we divide up the outcomes into short term, medium term, and long term. In the short term, what we cared about was, do people click to register for our online session? Does that differ if you got the control email with no diversity statement versus the treatment email with the diversity statement? And we find that if you got the email with the diversity statement, you become 50% less likely to click on our resource. And so that might be that this language of differences, like chilled students, maybe they thought, okay, this resource isn't for me, or no, I don't want to participate in this resource because maybe these things will be discussed. It could also just be, though, that the control email is shorter than the treatment email because it doesn't include a diversity statement. And so we looked at the medium term outcomes. So 12 weeks afterwards, we administered our survey. And the survey asks about a bunch of different things, including sense of belonging, STEM affinity, and stereotype threat. So worries regarding, do you agree with the statement? I worry that my academic performance will be used to confirm or disprove a stereotype.
Hmm.
And so we find that this worry increases among Black and Hispanic students who saw the diversity email versus Black and Hispanic students who saw the control email.
And this is
Um,
months later, right?
this is 3 months later.
And
So
everything
it's
else is
12
the
weeks later.
same. So just
Yeah,
having gotten that email at the beginning of your school year might have had a really big impact also because it was kind of this time of transition, I imagine.
exactly. Exactly. I like the way you put it, that it was a time of transition. And yeah, this is where students are thinking about their identities and they're, in this community with people from backgrounds that are very different from their own. We don't find any change among Asian students, and we think again that this is evidence of stereotype threat because it's domain specific, and we
Hmm.
wouldn't and the worries regarding stereotypes rising for Black and Hispanic students may be related to the negative associations that many Black and Hispanic students have reported they're aware of regarding their social group in the academic domain. Whereas Asian students have a different set of stereotypes within the academic domain. We
What
also
is
looked
the
at
makeup at Michigan State? Is it pretty low numbers of Hispanic and Black
Mhm.
students, but pretty high numbers of Asians relatively?
So here within our sample, it's even. It's
Okay.
6 to 8 percentage points for all three groups, which again indicates that it seems like it's not just about being minoritized or being tokenized. It's about how you're forming beliefs regarding how others view you in the academic domain. And so again, I think that speaks to stereotype threat. Further evidence is we looked to measures of STEM affinity. So we ask students, do you agree that you fit into STEM? Do you agree that um, you are academically prepared for STEM? And these measures of STEM affinity are lower for women in the treatment group compared to women who saw the control email. And they're higher for men in the treatment group compared to men who saw the control email. And so, again, this seems to be some evidence of stereotype threat for women and stereotype lift for men if you think that STEM is stereotyped to be male favoring.
So
Um,
women tend to say they have less affinity to STEM if they were in the treatment group and saw the diversity
correct.
statement.
Women, yep. And then in addition, um, so we looked at the administrative data, and I think this is the evidence that really matters. So we know when students change courses, and that means we can basically look at the timing to see, is there differential behavior in control and treatment the week of our intervention, 1 week after our intervention, 2 weeks, et cetera. And so what we see is there's no change between treatment and control before our intervention, which makes sense because nobody saw any email, any diversity statements.
Hmm.
But the very week of our intervention, we see that people become less likely to add 200 and up courses if they saw the diversity email compared to the control email.
All
And
groups.
for everyone, but this appears to be driven by men.
And
So
200 and up are the more advanced. So the men
yes,
actually reduce the
yes. So
choice of
they're less
advanced
likely to add
courses.
these 200 and up courses compared to the 100 courses.
Do you know why that might be?
Um, well, it seems consistent with the decline in GPA that we find for men at the end of the semester.
Hmm.
And then when so we find this decline in GPA that seems to be driven by white, Hispanic, and Black males. Um,
Due to
and
being in treatment again,
for
or just
right
overall?
for treated men compared to control men. So these are all differences between
Okay.
control and treatment. So treated men, Black, Hispanic, and white men have lower GPAs than those who saw their counterparts who saw the control emails. And when we looked to try to address exactly what you're asking, why might this be? The survey evidence indicates that they are less likely to say they know where to get university resources like mental health support, social support, etc. Um,
So they might
and
have been deterred by the diversity statement from seeking out resources because they thought they weren't for them, or at least the white men.
yeah, and that's exactly. I like the way you put that because that's exactly what's consistent with the lower click rates for our academic resource, right? They were just men were especially less likely to register. It was a 70% drop off for men compared to a 40% drop off for women. Um, and so it seems so there seems to be evidence that coinciding with this easy like this lower likelihood of choosing advanced courses, the very weak of our intervention, but also this lower GPA is this uh, greater disengagement from the university, just being less likely to to know where to access university resources for mental and social support. And this parallels some prior evidence in psychology where they actually find an increase in GPA from improving sense of belonging. And they argue that the mechanism appears to be greater use of office hours, greater use of study groups. And so it seems like, this is a parallel but opposite result where it seems like they're not using as many resources. And consistent with that is that the decline in GPA seems to be driven by the easier courses and not, the advanced courses. And so it doesn't seem like this is a brain story here. It seems like it's a disengagement story.
So just to wrap up, it sounds like when we put out diversity statements and have all the best intentions, and maybe it's not even a high touch intervention, it's just one email, it can actually have really big effects. And sometimes those effects also are negative. And so it's really important to test these and try to understand what the effect is and is that the intended effect, and come up with an alternative if this isn't working. So
Precisely. I think that's a great way to sum up. And I want to be clear that I don't think the takeaway is that diversity statements are categorically harmful, but that, for something that we adopted as enthusiastically as we did, we should have empirically tested them because the devil's always in the details and there could be unintended consequences with even the best of intentions. And so, we need to use our tools. We need to empirically test things before we roll them out because we don't know which domains it could be affecting, which subgroups it could be affecting, et cetera. And so that's why a holistic approach is necessary.
So, do you have solutions? Like, should we augment the statement with something else, or what would be something if
That's
Michigan
a great
State said to you right now, "Okay, let's fix this. Let's do something new." What's the next thing you would test if you could do any of your ideal kind of interventions or programs?
I think this has given me a lot of caution, like it's giving me a lot of pause. And so if Michigan State came to me and said, okay, what can we do to improve sense of belonging? I would say we need to test. We need to figure out like what are the specific levers that are going on. We need to do it in the lab and then we need to roll it out into the field. Because I so we wrote this diversity statement. I wrote it with undergraduate students at this university after having read, this is the literature on the best diversity statements you can write, emphasizing differences rather than lumping everybody into a group helps people feel recognized. Um, and we tried really hard to craft these diversity statements to look like what other institutions were using. And so, I think the biggest takeaway here is before we do anything, we've got to test it out.
Well, thank you so much. Really interesting dive deep into diversity statements and some unintended consequences. Hopefully, we continue working as academics to come up with better solutions. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Anya.